The next thing that I'm going to talk about here is those situations where you need to make a large rendering. So when I'm talking about a large rendering, that might be something that you a rendering that you might need to put on a full-size sheet. So something that you're printing in large format, or maybe you're doing a something that's going on like on a sheet of plywood. So maybe a site, a picture of the project that's going to go on a piece of plywood outside your site. So something that's going to go on the fence so that potential buyers might be able to look at a preview of the rendering. So in a situation like that, you're going to need something that is a lot more than, 3,000 pixels, right? So something bigger than 3,000 pixels. If you're printing, say, on, an 8-foot wide piece of plywood, you probably need at least 100 dots per inch, so that even somebody walking by isn't going to be like straining to look at all the blurred pixels that are going to be on the rendering. So if that's the case, if we are indeed really, so here, let me just get the size sorted out here. So if we were really indeed going to be making it 96 inches here, right? So that's, just watch when we get into the rendering dialog box here. So 28,000 pixels, you would run out of RAM, just about guaranteed. Now if we drop our resolution here, so here you can see in the printer resolution there's a bunch of presets, and you can also just manually type in a resolution yourself. So here we're at about 9,600 pixels. That is going to take a long, long time. So let's talk about a little trick here that will allow you to cut your rendering time for the whole job pretty much in half. So I'm calling this here the big render. We're at the bottom of page 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this rendering job up into 2 pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my original here and I'm going to duplicate it. So I've got 2 copies of this render. I've got the original and I've got the copy. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to call this one left, and I'm going to call this one right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try and find something that's roughly in the middle of the render to use as a common point of reference between the 2 renders. So I'm going to just adjust the crop region, and I'm going to use this little skylight in the middle here as a point of reference. So there's my, okay, I should have done it the other way. This is the left render. There you go. So I'm just going to have a little bit of that skylight there in the view. Go over to the other side here, and this is my right side render. And just make sure that I've got this little bit of skylight in both views so that, like, this top corner of the skylight is visible in both, so that when the renders are done, I can overlay them in Photoshop. And so you're like, well, you just cut the render in half. It's going to render in half the time. No. It actually renders in far less than half of the time. So if I cut the size of the render in half, it actually takes a quarter of the amount of time to render. So by taking those 2 renders and cutting them into 2 pieces, you can actually cut your rendering time in half by rendering the 2 halves separately. Because when you double the size of a render, it's 4 times as many pixels, and it takes double the time to render it. So this way too, it also helps you with RAM and keeps the whole process a little bit more manageable. So this is something that you'd use if you don't have 3D Studio or another faster rendering program, and and you need to do a very large render. So those are your large renderings. Okay, let's go on to interior rendering. Now, with interior renders, what makes an interior render more difficult than an exterior render is that you really do have to focus on small scale objects, like you can see here. We've got the plates, we've got this, I guess it's a wine jar here. And so as we set up this render, it's important that you have all of that stuff in place so that when you set up the render, it's going to look realistic. Now, I had to unlock the view. So down at the bottom here, there's a in your camera views, you can lock the orientation of the camera so it can't be accidentally moved by someone. That's an important feature in your camera views. That way you can just tie down that orientation of the view. Now, as I was saying here, entourage is important. So having this library of cutlery, placemats, all of that stuff is what helps to sell your render. So if we look at some example Revit interior renderings here. So one of the aspects of this rendering that makes it work so well is things like the placemats and the plates and the glasses and the attention to the cables on the light fixtures. So everything about this rendering helps really blur the line between what's real and what's rendered. And of course these days we're coming to expect higher and higher quality in our renderings. So it used to be when I first started teaching Revit, everybody oohed and awed over this, and now this is considered standard procedure, right? So getting to that point where you can do it yourself, though, is obviously still a bit of a challenge. So having that entourage in place is important. Now, after the entourage is in place, now we're going to start talking about the interior rendering settings that facilitate a good interior render. So when you go into your render dialog box, you've got the option of these different schemes. There's interior schemes and there are exterior schemes. The difference between the exterior and the interior is the amount of dynamic range. So if you folks know, just with regards to photo quality and exposure, because of the extreme amount of sunshine that you get in outside shots, the actual dynamic range of your photographs is less outside than it is inside. So when you decide to use one of the interior schemes, Revit changes the dynamic range that is provided in the image output when the rendering is complete. So you can see here that there are 3 different kinds of interior schemes and exterior schemes as well. And so anytime that you have the sun on, Revit adjusts the dynamic range to deal with the extreme amount of sunlight or the extreme amount of light that the sun produces. There are other modes here for sun and artificial. So these are your dusk shots. So you would only really use the sun and artificial shots at sunrise or at sunset. And then you have interior artificial only, where Revit turns the sun off and only shows the light that emanates from the light fixtures in the view. Now, we're just going to take a stab at letting the rendering go here, and we'll talk about the quality of the output, because I don't think it's going to be that great. And the reason being is the light fixtures that have been provided in this model. Now, we'll come back to our rendering here in a moment. You can see we're getting some output already, and it's not particularly great. The lights aren't putting out enough light, and we'll see here. We might be able to adjust the exposure and so on, but it's still We're not getting good results. Now, I'm actually going to get you guys and point you to BIM object. Now, there's a reason for this. BIM object is the best website for you folks to download light fixtures for rendering work. So set up an account with yourself. They don't send spam. They're a very reputable company. There's no concern. So once you're logged in, you can start looking for a light fixture. Now, with any luck, if you're working with an interior designer or you're working with an electrical consultant who's specified a light fixture for you, or if you want, you can go through BIM Object's category of light fixtures and find a fixture that appeals to you just from an aesthetic basis. So on BIM Object, often they will have, in fact most of the times, they will have the Revit family that you can download. But not only are you just getting a Revit family, you are getting the photometric accurate light output that this fixture will make in real life. And over here you can see there's photometric files. So we're going to talk about these in a second. I'm just going to download the Revit file here. Okay, so meanwhile, over here, our rendering's not looking very good. It's looking pretty dim. And so even if we were to try and play with the exposure here and try and make it a little brighter, it's not bad. We're getting a little bit of light now. But I don't know if you noticed, but I've got light all along the bar here, and how come it's only illuminating the center of the table? What's going on? So a lot of these out-of-the-box light fixtures that you get with Revit do not have accurate photometric modeling of light built into the fixture. Let's talk about what that looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this file here on the desktop that I downloaded from the BIM Object website. Okay, so here's our light fixture. This is based on the, what do you call it? The generic model, face-based family. You guys remember when we made that round window and we said that you could mount it onto the surface of any object? That's this thing, same thing. So they built a light fixture that mounts itself onto the surface of anything. And remember with that, with those generic model face-based families, you build them as if you're looking down on the surface that you're going to attach the object to. So here we're looking down on the ceiling, and there's the cables that will suspend that light fixture. So that's the orientation. Now, this globe-looking thing here in the middle, and you'll find this in any light fixture that you're using in Revit. So in our model here, when we were looking at the kitchen here, these light fixtures that are provided in the example file, if we go and just open it, this object also has a light source inside it. That's what this funny looking little wasp nest is here. So when you get a fixture that you want to use inside your projects, if you just see a very simple spherical shape for the light, and that's what that thing is right there, it's called the light source. Let's turn on shading here. That's not good enough. So here you're basically just emitting spherical light. In fact, I had a funny incident that happened to me one time where I was rendering a secondary church auditorium. There was a bunch of suspended fixtures that were brought down from the ceiling. we hadn't modeled, we didn't have the fancy lighting data. And so we just built these things up and I rendered it. And when the rendering was complete, I noticed that about 3/4 up the wall, there was the paint changed color on the wall. And I couldn't figure out what in the world was going on. So I changed a few things and rendered again. What was happening was that I had one of these perfect light sources in my lamp, and it was emanating out, and what it was doing is it was catching the circular edge of the lamp, and it was sending a precise shadow horizontally against the wall. So I was just seeing where the light fell off immediately. Of course, if folks look around, you can see there's a gradual light fall off with most lights because the light doesn't emanate from a perfect source. It's distributed. So let's talk about that. When you go onto the BIM object website, they also provide this photometric data. This is how the light distribution is going to work with this particular fixture. So when we go and we look inside this file, there's a whole bunch of these IES files that are inside it. And now you might look at it and go, well, that's just gobbledygook. No, what it is it's the code from the manufacturer's cut sheet for this light. So if you go to that manufacturer's website, you download the brochure for it, they'll tell you which one of these files matches the light that you're specifying. So it might be the number of bulbs that are in the fixture and the wattage of each one of those bulbs that's in the fixture. You pick the matching one and you go and use it in your light. Let's grab some random one here. And so there's the IES. And what does IES stand for? The Illuminating Engineering Society. These guys are so badass that they got the Windows file type named after their organization. Well played, well played. So IES, the Engineering, or the Illuminating Engineering Society. So that's what these files are for. So these guys set up the standard for how light is propagated from a light fixture. So inside Revit, inside the family here, when we go to light source definition, so this is something that we're going to be talking about here. Well, I guess we can talk about it now on page 5. IES definitions and families. So first of all, we need to tell Revit, so we click on the light source, we need to tell Revit and confirm that it is using not one of those perfect light sources that you see here in the dialog box, but that we are going to use the light web, the IES version of a light source. So pretty much all of the lighting objects that you can download from BIM object have this set up, ready to go already. That's step one. Now the next thing that we need to do is go into family types for our light family. And we have to go and find the, where is it here? Photometric web file. So this is in the notes, bottom of page 5. And right now it's just using a generic one. So what we got to do is point this fixture to the IES file that we just downloaded. That's the proper one for this object. So we just went and got it off the BIM object and hit OK. And you're like, what? Okay, so what is this? It means that this is how the light's being distributed by this fixture. So predominantly it's a downlight. If you see one of these wasp nests that goes upwards a little bit, so sometimes it looks like one of those, I'm going to geek myself out here. You guys remember from chemistry, physics, where they're showing like electron distributions around atoms? It's kind of what it reminds me of. Sometimes one has a little wasp nest on the top of the fixture because it's partially an uplighting fixture. This one is just a downlighting fixture, so most of it's being sent off in these two directions, and there's a little bit less light that's being that's emanating from the middle of the fixture. As we orbit around the fixture, you can also see how the light distribution is happening from side to side. So predominantly this thing is spreading it along its length, but not so much around its width. This will give you realistic rendered results. So you want to make sure that any light fixture that you are using in your interior renders is making use of one of these IES files, and if you can't figure out which one to use, you can just pick one of them and roll with it. You'll at least get something decent for your rendering results. Now, one of the other things I want to talk about here is that when you are doing a rendering of your building inside, that you really should set up light groups. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go to the default 3D view for this project here. Now I'm just picking the light object and I'm typing in IC for isolate category. So what this does is it allows me to just see in 3D all the lighting objects in the project. I actually have here, so I'm just going to go to you guys will be able to see this file. It's in our share out folder. I'm just going to grab it here. So what we're going to have in this project is quite a large number of lights, and what we're aiming to do here is to control which lights are emanating light during the rendering process. So we're going to have one particular view here in our project where there's a series of lights that are in this space, but there's also lights that are in other spaces around the building which you can't see because your camera's in a certain zone. So if you're looking down one particular corridor and there's a whole bunch of lights that are illuminating different floors in the model, what's the point? If you can't see them, don't render them. So it's very similar to the idea of turning off categories in your project that you don't need to see in the rendering that you are in. So what we're going to do here in a few seconds, once the upgrade's done, is we are going to talk about taking those lights and turning them off using light groups. So this is the exact view that we're going to be talking about here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the 3D view of this project. Now if you folks want to do this, you can find this file in the Session 11 folder. Go ahead and open it up and we'll go through this process together. So once you've got the advanced sample project open from the Session 11 folder and you're in the 3D view, we're going to zoom in here. And from the roof view, if you just orbit a little bit, we should be able to see, oh yeah, there's one of the light fixtures on the wall here. So one of those light fixtures right by the door, I'm going to click on that light fixture and I'm going to type in IC for isolate category. There we go. So now you can see there's light fixtures here on a few different floors of the project. So what we're going to do is we're going to put these lights into light groups based on what floor they're on. Now once you have lights in your model, so we're looking at page 4 of the notes now using light groups. To create or edit a light group, select a light fixture. Yes? IC for isolate category. Okay, so when you click this light fixture, you folks can see up on the ribbon that there's a little drop-down menu right here. This is your light group editor. apparently these lights are edible. Like, you can eat them. You see? What are they called? They're called scone lights. They're scones. Who knew? You put a light on the wall and you can eat it. If you're hungry, that's good. Wouldn't be any of use to me at my house because they'd all be gone. So it's not a scone, it's a sconce. And in fact, it doesn't really make that much sense to create a light group called sconce lighting unless you intend to do a render where the sconce lights are doing the work and you turn the ceiling lights off. But what we're going to do here is we're going to blow up all these light groups and we're going to focus on doing light groups by floor. Now, some of these lights are in array groups, so we need to undo that. So I'm just going to do a window select here around some of these lights and see they're in an array group. So I got to ungroup them first. So any light objects that have been arrayed, window select them and ungroup them. Okay, so now none of my lights are in groups. Okay, so the first order of business here is we need to organize the light groups for the project. So as it says in the notes, select one of your lights, and then you'll see the light group menu on the options bar. And from this menu here, we're going to choose Edit New from the menu. So here's all of the light groups that have been created so far. So you folks should be able to see the artificial lights dialog box here. So we've got pendant, table, and scone. Scone? Scone, whatever, scone, whatever it is. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete the light groups. So just pick each one and in sequence delete them. Now this does not delete the lights that are within those groups. They're now all showing up here inside this list of ungrouped lights. So what we need to do is now make some light groups so we can separate our 4th floor lights from our 3rd floor lights. So I'm going to create a new group here, group options, new. So I'm going to call this level 4 corridor. So these are the lights that are going to be in a level 4 corridor, and then I will do the same for level 3 corridor, level 3 corridor. So if there were lights that were inside the classrooms on either side of the corridor, I don't want to render those. So I would make, and we're not going to do this, but you could make light groups for your level 4 classrooms. So that way you can turn off your classroom lights and leave your corridor lights on because your camera right now happens to be in the corridor, not inside a classroom. So go ahead and hit OK. So what we're going to do here, all of these lights that are around my window, my cursor here, all of these lights are on the 4th floor. So I'm going to window select them here. Now, I don't know why. For some reason, they've stopped highlighting. Huh. I don't know if that's happening for you. It might just be because I am screencasting my Revit here. I'm going to close my 3D view and come back into it. See if that freshens things up. There we go. Okay. So once you selected a bunch of objects, you'll see that menu up here. And now I can add them to my level 4 corridor light group. Revit will give a little confirmation that I'm putting all of those lights into the group. Hit OK. Then my level 3 lights here, so these are the lights that are on my next floor down. I'm just going to orbit around, so I'm looking sort of horizontally at them. Select them, and then add them to the level 3 corridor. Okay, so now we have all of our lights in these two light groups, and now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to that public night rendering view here. And in the render dialog box, we have artificial lights. So inside the render dialog box, if you are using one of the artificial light schemes, it will engage this button here, artificial lights. You can open it up, and now inside the artificial lights dialog box, you can turn off a whole light group with a single click. And so what this will do is it will prevent those lights from not exuding, emitting light. They're not going to emit any light. So inside the render dialog box, folks, so go into your level 3 floor public night rendering view. It's in your 3D views here. O3 floor public night rendering. Open it up. And then you've got to go into the render dialog box on the view tab. And there in the view tab, go find the artificial lights button. And in here, you can, I just collapsed the light lists here. You can turn off your level 3 corridor lights all at once. So now those lights won't emit light, and it'll take that much less time to render the view. Okay, if you folks have some questions, we'll take them now. If not, we're going to move on to detailed rendering materials, page 6 of the notes. Now, in tonight's folder, now I'm going to grab the entire session 11 folder here and just download it. So we're going to talk about how you can make your own custom materials for rendering purposes. But first of all here, we need a little backgrounder on materials again and their so-called assets. Okay, so in our advanced project here, I'm going to go to the Manage tab and I'm going to go over to Materials. And we're going to talk about the what we find in the Materials palette. So here I've opened up the Material Browser, so like what we see on page 6. I'm going to go down and I'm going to choose the brick material, just for now, B-R-I-C-K. So up in the top left corner here, you can choose a material name, and Revit will filter the materials in your project based on the name that you type in the top left corner. So looking on page 6, this is just the layout of the materials dialog box. So starting in the top left corner, type in a name to search for a material in the project. It will also show materials in one of Revit's material libraries at the bottom. So here at the top, on the left-hand side, is the project's material library. And if you hit this little arrow button here where it says Material Libraries, and you hit the up arrow, it's going to show the material list from Revit's own material library. And so if you're looking for something like brick and you didn't see brick at all in your project, you could import brick from the Revit library. So these are materials that are not in your project. They're from Revit's own internal material library. So I could grab this, hit the up arrow, and add this new brick to my project. So now this brick and everything, including how it would render, gets added to my project. One thing, when you add a material from the bottom up to your project, you need to make sure on the graphics tab that you hit the box for use render appearance, so Revit will give it a bit of color. Otherwise Revit just leaves it as like a medium gray color. All right, so materials in Revit have these 4 tabs. Well, 5 tabs actually, but we have these assets. So looking at the top of page 6. So first of all, we've got our graphics asset. This is the hatching that's used to show your materials in your working drawings. So here, if we use brick on the outside of the building, there's your brick. When you cut through it in plan or in section, this is the hatch that you get. Anytime that you see a Revit hatch, ladies and gentlemen, make sure that you change the hatch color to gray. It just makes your drawings nicer to look at. We've already got black lines for the outlines of our building. If you make your hatches gray, it just makes them that much nicer to look at. Your surface patterns are based on the fill patterns dialog box. So that's something we discussed in the intro course, and there's lots of stuff out there to talk about how you can import your own fill patterns into Revit. We're going to be focusing on the appearance tab tonight. So we're going to move to the appearance tab here, looking at masonry brick. So if you remember from the intro course, we told you that what Revit does is it has a bunch of digital pictures of real world materials that it provides to you, so that when you choose to render this material, it's got this specially photoshopped version of this image that it tiles across the face of your building. And there's other little tricks that it does, like the relief pattern, which makes this brick bumpy. It gives it a little bit of well, here it's calling it relief. So instead of it just being flat, like wallpaper, it makes it have a little bit more of a rough appearance. The black parts are pushed into the surface, and the lighter parts stay at the surface. So there's a slider here so that you can change the amount of recessing that you get at the mortar joints. So that's your appearance asset. Now there's other assets as well. Some materials have them, some don't. For the physical, which is strength, and thermal, which is heat transference. Now generally speaking, if these 2 tabs aren't appearing for a particular material, it doesn't matter. We don't usually care. In the future, as Revit's being used more and more for calculating the energy, how much energy your building uses, those may become more and more important. So let's go over to editing materials on page 7. Now, on the appearance tab, all of the sum total of the settings that are available for how this material is going to render is called the asset. This is the appearance asset. Now, if you look for a material on the top left of the properties palette, you'll get a fairly finite list of different materials that you can use in your project. So what I'm saying is, if you search for brick, you'll probably get about a dozen or a dozen and a half different appearances of brick that list out here. But Revit actually has the ability to show brick with a lot more different colors and a lot more different designs than the ones that you'll see down here. Because these are full defined materials. Revit has a huge library of what are called appearance assets that you can use. Okay. So, for each given material that you have in your project, we have these assets. So, we have the ID, we have graphics, and then we have appearance and the other ones, physical and thermal. Now, I'm not going to worry about physical and thermal, but I'll just list them here quickly. So all of these bits and pieces here, all of these assets comprise a material. Now, Revit has a material library. And so I'm going to put the letters out here, OOTB. This means out of the box. These are ones that are built into the software. So Revit itself has this material library that you can bring into your project if you don't have a particular material, like some kind of maybe steel or what have you. So you can bring in one of these materials into Revit. But what Revit has is this massive library of appearance assets. This is also out of the box. So this is not in your project. Ships with Revit. And these appearance assets can be brought in to fill this slot as part of your materials definition. So there's a series of materials with all their different physical and other settings that you can bring into your projects, and once you've done that, then you can further refine your appearance asset by grabbing one of the other appearance assets out of Revit's own library. And this library is huge. So whereas the out-of-the-box material library is, small-ish, there's a ton of appearance assets. And what we're going to show even beyond that is how you can modify one of the out-of-the-box appearance assets to use a picture of a material like carpet or stone that you might have got from a supplier or manufacturer. A lot of these manufacturers, like Shaw Carpets and others, have an ortho-corrected high-res photo of their product taken. Number one, for you to review the colors and its appearance, but also so you can use them when you're rendering. So this appearance assets library is what we are going to look at now. So when you are on the Appearance tab, to get access to that big, huge library of different appearance assets for this particular material, so here we're looking at brick. So we hit the little Replace Asset button, and it pops up this one, the Asset Browser. So this is the sum total of all of the different rendered appearances of all different kinds of materials. So Revit doesn't serve up the appearances of brick. It serves up the whole enchilada of every single appearance of every single thing that Revit's got. So you're like, what do I get? So you gotta look for it, type in brick. That'll help filter things down. So when you're looking inside the asset browser, you can kind of bring it down a little bit, and now you can see here that there's different libraries of brick, so you can kind of go through them and look and find one that might appeal. So maybe you've got the running bond, or maybe you want a stacked bond. There might be one in here for stacked. Let's see here. Oh yeah, there's 1/3 running. Okay, so let's say that I want to grab one of these. So 1/3 running. So once you've found a material asset that you like, an appearance asset I should say, appearance asset that you like, when you've got your cursor on that row, on the right hand side there's a little button, and what this does is it takes this appearance asset and pushes it into the slot, the appearance asset slot on your material. So whatever existing appearance asset, which is this one here, masonry brick, it's going to punch that out of the slot here for my Revit material and put this particular appearance asset in instead. So now it's going to render differently. So now masonry brick, and that's just the name of the material. You can name that whatever you want. So the name of the Revit material and the name of the appearance asset that controls how it renders, they don't have to be the same. They can be different. So this masonry brick that you see here is just the name of the bag that's holding all of this other stuff here. So masonry brick. So that material contains all of these assets. Now, a particular appearance asset, which is basically just a digital picture of something with some flips and switches and dials and stuff, so we can affect how that, or control how that digital picture of that material renders. This appearance asset, usually you have one appearance asset for each one of your materials in the project. Sometimes, because you're bringing in all these appearance assets from the Revit library, you can have more appearance assets in your project than you have materials. Now remember, moments ago, we had a different appearance asset for this material, right? It was red brick. Well, what happened to that red brick? It's still in your project. It's still here. It's just not being used. So what that means is you can have appearance assets that you import into your project and that are here in your Revit database that aren't actually attached to any of the materials that you defined. Is that bad? Not really. It doesn't make Revit any slower. It's a very small piece of information. But what it means is that when you go into the Replace Asset dialog box, at the very, very top, there's Document Assets. And so what this does, this top left folder, if you will, shows all of the appearance assets that have been imported into the project so far. Now, what if some of them aren't being used? Can you purge them? Yes. So on the Manage tab, if you go to Purge Unused, which is right here, now whenever you use the Purge dialog box, you should absolutely positively always hit Check None before you get started. You don't want to just go thermonuclear and nuke everything. You just want to be judicious in what you're removing. So I'm going to go down to Material Assets here and go to Appearance. So right now, starting from carpet and going all the way down to wood veneers, those are all material assets that aren't pointing at any particular material. They're here in a project, but they're not being used by any of the materials in the project so far. And in fact, there are materials in the project, starting with asphalt and going all the way down to wood veneers. These materials aren't being used by any of the construction assemblies, so there's no walls or floors or roofs or ceilings that are using these materials. So can you purge them? You bet. So first thing you'd do is you'd purge the materials that you're not using. So there's asphalt. You know what? Probably use that for some driveways, so I won't nuke that one. So I'm going to go down to the bottom here. So here I'm nuking all the materials that I'm not using except asphalt, because that might be still used for paving. So those materials are gone. So I purged them. I go back into the purge dialog box the next time, and now I will purge the material assets, the appearance assets that aren't being used. Now, what I did was I, on purpose, purged the full-blown materials first, because once those materials have been purged from the project, they're going to have their own appearance assets that aren't pointing at anything because the materials are gone. So in the next pass, I came back and purged out the appearance assets that aren't being used anymore. So go ahead and hit OK. This isn't going to make Revit save that much faster, maybe a second or two. It's not really a big deal. What it does is it just means that when you're in the materials dialog box, by virtue of the fact that we'd purged materials, this list from top to bottom got shorter. And then, if we were looking at one of these materials and we wanted to play with its appearance asset, when we go to the Appearance tab and go to the Asset Replace button, up at the top here where it says Document Assets, this list got a lot shorter because we purged out all of the appearance assets that aren't being used. And that's what these are here. These are the appearance assets. So that's what's going on with this dialog box. Now, when you folks go to choose, in the asset browser, when you go to choose one of these appearance assets, depending on the appearance asset you choose, there's certain settings that are baked into each one of these assets. So what I'm saying is the settings for stone that you see, whoops. So when I go to stone here, S-T-O-N-E, so these particular settings here for stone are different than the ones for concrete. And the ones for glass are different still. And then there's settings for water. There's settings for, you name it, metals. Each particular appearance asset has a specific set of controls to make it look like, as much as possible, the real world version of this material. These are actually called procedures. That's the dorky name for it. So these procedures make this stone look like stone. And there's a separate set of procedures for glass. So here, if we go up and look for glass, right? Different set of controls, different set of procedures. There's controls for the sheets of glass, for how reflective the glass is, and if the glass is tinted. If you want to have like totally shiny reflective glass, and you go into the appearance asset library and you choose one of those other kinds of glass, like maybe opaque glass or partially opaque glass, then there'll be additional controls, procedures, as they call it, to make that glass look bumpy instead of smooth. So when you folks go into the asset browser and you choose one of these things, like here, this one here, this might have a different set of assets. Let's see. No, that one looks the same. Let's try a different one. Let's try, see if we can find a bumpy glass. Well, this acrylic one. Will that be it? Glass. Maybe frosted. If I could only spell. Frosted. There we go. Frosted white glass. Bring that appearance asset in. Okay, so this is different than the clear glass procedures, right? There's a roughness setting that wasn't in that other appearance asset. So sometimes when you're bringing in these appearance assets, if you don't find the controls that you want, you might have to go hunt for another appearance asset in the library that just happens to have those controls that you want. So it shouldn't take you too much poking around to try and find the controls that you want from the appearance assets that are in the library. Now what we're going to look at next here is starting from scratch to build your own materials from scratch. Now typically this happens with finishes. So things like glass and metal, those are kind of all things that you can, you know, the out-of-the-box library is usually good enough. Now, let's just hop on the internet here. So when we're talking about things like carpets or carpet tile, Milliken Contract. So Milliken Contract, they're an arm of Shaw Carpets, I believe. And so these guys provide high-grade floor coverings. So here we can go in and just drill down and find maybe one of their modular carpets, so a carpet tile. And so go in and find one of these colors, pull it up, and we'll get a high resolution. So here we can switch to the swatch view, and it should pull it up. What's going on here? Okay, there we go. So if I hit the high res button here, it's going to download a high resolution image of that JPEG. So that is good enough for rendering. So what we want to do now, if we wanted to use one of these pictures that we're getting off the internet for rendering purposes, how do we go about making that happen? Now in our session 11 folder for tonight, we've got a couple of examples here. So what I've done is I've got a carpet tile pattern and I have a stone pattern. So that's from StoneCAD. So there's the original color image. And then just in Photoshop, I turned it to grayscale, and there it is there, and just cranked up the contrast a little bit. So what this does is it allows us to use that relief pattern or that bump setting so that we can take the original color image and where there's shadows, make that appear more recessed when we render this material. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start from scratch, and we're going to use these pictures, these digital images, in the creation of a new material. So we're on page 8 of the notes. Now, in the material browser, hit the Add New Material button as shown at the right. So down at the bottom here, you folks will see Create New Material. Now when you make a new material, it adds a new material on the left, and it adds a new appearance asset for that material. It creates a new one from scratch. So you'll see here that when we make this new material, there it is there, it just calls it default new material. And in the notes it says, you know what, I'm going to rename the material first because I get nervous because I might lose my place, right? So we've got our default new material. Let's right click on it and choose rename. When you're naming your materials, be organized. Revit tends to prefix the materials so that they're all kind of together as a group. The concrete materials are all together. The finishes are all together. So I'm going to stay organized. Masonry is all together. So masonry-stone. So right now, you can see that the appearance asset is pretty boring. It's just gray. No definition to it. And so right now, masonry stone has been given this new appearance asset called generic 4. And the out-of-the-box appearance asset that they give to you has all the bells and and whistles. This is the most fancy of all of the different procedures. This would be fine for anything except maybe glass. If you're going to add a new glass color, you'd say, you know, glass dash blue, and then over here you'd replace this generic asset, you'd go hunt for a glass appearance asset from the asset browser. But this is good. This is good for us. Now what we need to do is give the appearance asset a name that matches our stone here. So we want to make sure that the material name and the appearance asset for it have similar names. So generally speaking, on the appearance tab, the information section is collapsed. We're going to expand it here, and so now we can change the name. So we're going to call this, what are we going to call this? I don't know. I'm going to call it cultured stone, and I think it's field stone. Field stone. There we go. Oh, you know what? I'm totally barking up the wrong tree here, and I'll tell you why. The reason is that this set of procedures is actually too fancy for what we want to do. I'm just realizing that as I look at the notes. So what we're going to do is we're going to bail on this generic material, and we're going to go up to the asset browser straight away. And it says in the asset browser, click and type in stone. How many people here fancy themselves as a pretty decent speller? Oh, come on. It's got to be a few of you. A good speller. Yeah. Oh, come on. Fieldstone, uncoursed, weathered. Oh, you mean it's not sharp? It's coarse? No, wait a minute. You mean uncoursed. Spelled it wrong. You know, like, you can't even trust your $5,000 software to have your material name spelled properly. Yeah, that's the asset we're going to bring in. Fieldstone, uncoursed, weathered. Okay, so hit the little button on the right to pull in that appearance asset. Now, why are we doing this? We're doing this because this particular appearance asset has the controls that we want to use to set up our material. So this appearance asset is pointing at this sort of gravelly stone picture. So what we're going to do right now is on the side here, there's a little drop arrow that says Edit Image. So what we need to do now is navigate to the Session 11 folder so that we can change the picture from this rock to the rock that I provided for you. So when you're in the Edit Image dialog box, right where it says Source, put your cursor over the text and it turns blue. So now what it does is it opens up this dialog box which shows all of the digital photos that are in Revit's library for all of its materials. And it's like, holy mackerel, there's a ton of them in there. We don't want any of these. So what you folks need to do is go navigate to your Session 11 folder and find the CSV 250T and hit OK. So that is what you should see on the screen. Now, at this point, the other thing that we need to do here is to determine if the sizing of the photo makes sense. So this thing is saying that this picture of our cultured stone is about 3 foot, bit, like over 3 feet wide, just a little bit more than 3 feet wide, and a little bit more than that tall. The proportions, for some reason here, aren't matching. And usually when you get a picture of a material from a manufacturer, it is square. If it is not, it's up to you to either lock or unlock the proportions. This thing here keeps the proportions even compared to what they are right now. No, I want to make this square, and for some reason this particular appearance asset is not scaling it square. So I'm going to undo the, what do they call this thing? Aspect ratio. There we go. So this allows you to change the X and Y sizing independently. I'm just going to make it 914 for both. 914 millimeters. So that it's basically making this a square rendition of the rock. So if you folks want to go and find it, go up to the source section here, hit the text when it turns blue, go to the Session 11 folder, find the CSV 250T, and then change the scale to 914 for both. So that's step 1. So here you can see it's repeating it horizontally and vertically, so it just keeps copying this digital picture across the face of your project for as far as this material goes. So that's it, we're done. Now, the next thing that we need to do is right now, if we're just leaving it at this, this material is just going to be flat wallpaper, right? There's no bump, there's no relief. So here it might be hard for you to see on your screen, but this puppy's wallpaper right now, it's not looking at all fancy. So we need to add that in to our appearance asset definition here. So it's farther down in the list of procedures here, we've got the bump. So we need to enable that. And then Revit will automatically open up the file dialog so we can go and find the CSV 250T bump. So I added the bump on the end of the file name, so it makes it really easy to find that file and open. Now the next thing that we need to do is confirm the scaling. Now what did we have for our big picture? We had 914 for each. This one's showing us, well, 304.8, 1 foot. So I need to unlock this. Well, actually I don't need to unlock it. I just need to change the sizing of my bump so of course it matches the color photo, or otherwise it's going to be bumping at a different scale than the color photo, and that's going to look really weird. So, scale. Let's go in here. If you change one, it'll change the other. 914. Enter. So there we go. So now my bump is aligned with my digital pictures. If I zoom in now here, make this a little bigger. And so now I'm just going to increase the amount of roughness. You can also change the scene. So at the bottom here, there's a little icon that allows you to change the scene to, say, maybe a cube. This can be a good way to see how the bump action changes it. So you can see here's without the bump value, it just looks like wallpaper. Turn on the bump, and now it's going to start looking a little bit rougher. So you can kind of see how it's going to look like when it renders. Okay, so I'm going to move on to page 10 here. If you folks are a little bit behind, it doesn't matter. You'll be able to catch up on YouTube because I will upload these after we're done tonight. Now, once you've gone to the trouble of defining a material and you've done all the appearance asset work, and you've grabbed the pictures of your material, right? So we've got the appearance assets sorted. Maybe you've also added a surface hatch and a background hatch. So you've got that all configured. Wouldn't it be great if, instead of just having this material tied up in this project, that we could share this with our colleagues and have a shareable library on the network where we can put all of our materials and share them between us. So that's what we're talking about on page 10. A few things. If you are going to be sharing these images, Revit needs to be able to access it from each computer in the office. What does that mean? You can't have these images on your computer. They need to be on your server where all of the computers in your office can see them, obviously. So these things, you just search for them on your local computer, and they're on your local computer. You go to render it on another computer, it's just going to be gray, because Revit's not going to be able to find those pictures. So number one, put all this stuff on your server so everybody can see them. So now, the next step is going down to the bottom left corner of the materials dialog box here, and we can either open an existing library, or if your office hasn't even made one of these yet, you're going to need to create a new library. So I'm going to hit create. And so I'm going to go and find someplace where I can create one of these Autodesk libraries that can be seen by the office. I'm actually really pleased to say that this whole process here of creating a shared library, it's worked for many Revit versions. I'm thinking 10 years. So this means that if you had an Autodesk file library for rendering that you made like 5 years ago, it still works today. Oftentimes when you get new software versions, you end up having to let go of work you've done in the past because there's been changes in the software that make that old stuff incompatible. Fortunately, that's not the case here. So if you had a really well-developed material library from 2 or 3 years ago, all you have to do is, instead of creating a new library, you just need to point to an existing one. So now, I'm pointing to an existing library. There's nothing in it. So we're going to talk about what happens. So you create this new library, and then once you've created that new library, you're going to see that you can create a category in that new library. So this will allow you to make folders so you can store different kinds of materials in your office's library. So after you create a new library, you save it somewhere. Then here, now it's open, new library, and we're going to add a folder. So we'll call it masonry. Masonry. There we go. So that's a new folder. And then you might have another folder. So great category. So we'll call it floor finishes. There we go. So you can create all these different categories into which you can place these new materials that you define in your projects. So provided those 2 pictures are on the server, all you have to do to share this with your office, go grab masonry stone, drag, 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 and dump it into the masonry folder, and voila. Look at that. There it is. So now, in any future project, all you need to do, come into the materials library, go down to the bottom here, open up your office's library, click in the folder. There's your defined material. You'll see the up arrow, and you can import it into your project. There you go. Now, of course, I don't need to re-import it. I've already got this material in my project. But this material is sitting in a library now that's not in your project. It's not even in your office's template. It's just sitting out there. So you can import it into any future project.
But once you import it, it's in your project, so you can save and open the project somewhere else, and you will have the assets and materials.
Provided that wherever you open it, you still get access to these digital files, and they're at the same path as they were originally.
Oh, if you open in another office.
Well, of course, because these pictures aren't there. Those pictures have to be in the same place. So if in your other location, your other office, the path to these images was exactly the same, it would work. Revit doesn't know. But as long as those pictures are in the same path, same name of all the folders to get there, same drive letter, yeah.
Is there a way of exporting a Revit file that embeds images or brings or?
That's a good question. I don't believe so. No. So that's obviously a bit of a problem, I guess, but most of the times, you know, rendering for a certain office happens inside that office, right? So if you export your Revit project to 3D Studio to have 3D Studio render it, 3D Studio will actually look for all these digital pictures at the path that you create them at. So when you take this thing over to 3D Studio in your office, it goes pretty seamlessly. All the material assignments work well, from what I'm told. All right, so we are going to move on here to walkthroughs, page 11. So I'm going to suggest that we all go into the 3D view for this project. So we've done renderings now where the camera sits in one place and we see our model from that location. What we're going to do now is talk about moving the camera through the model and also doing solar animations. Page 11. So we'll start with solar animations first. So what we need to do is go down to the graphic display options here. So on the bottom here, 2 buttons over from the scale. So do this in your 3D view. And we're going to go into graphic display options here. And in this dialog box, we need to have cast shadows turned on. There's some notes there about, you know, if you want a background or not, but for now we're going to leave that. So what we need to do now, we have to expand the lighting section as shown on the bottom of page 11. And what we need to do in this dialog box here is we need to adjust the sun setting. So inside graphic display options, expand shadows, check the box for cast shadows, then expand the lighting section so that the sun setting button is available, and so you can click it. So here we are, we're over to page 12 of the notes here, talking about the sun settings. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to do a single day solar study. Single day. So let's say that you want to do a fall equinox solar study here. So there's all of these presets ready to go. So here we have a September 21st solar study. It's in Boston, of course. I'm going to rename it here. I'll just get rid of that Boston. There we go. So I'm just going to get rid of the Boston reference. And I'm going to change, of course, our location. So here I've renamed the solar study, so where it says location, Manchester, New Hampshire, I'm going to go into the, again, into the city list, switch modes, so it's the city list, and I'll go down to the V's and look for Vancouver. And hit OK. Actually, I should sort that out at this time of year. No, it would still be daylight saving time. So there we go. Now, one of the things I should point out, you guys know about True North and Project North now. So, Revit renders according to your True North settings, not your Project North. So, if Project North is horizontally on your screen, and it should be, and True North is pointing on some other angle, so that is the your shared coordinates icon, your survey point. So the green axis of your survey point, whatever direction that's pointing, that is True North. And that's how Revit is going to set up the path of the sun. So keep that in mind. And that's the way we want it. So yeah, so that's all good to go. Now, Revit moves the sun through the sky in, unfortunately, pretty large increments. You want to change your time interval here to the smallest increment you've got, and unfortunately, it's 15-minute increments. So the sun is going to jump through the sky at 15-minute jumps. I really wish you could drop it down to like 1 minute, because it still makes these solar studies not as smooth as I would like. So we've only got 49 frames. So you're only going to have 49 different snapshots of the sun's path through the sky. So that's all sorted. Hit OK. And now hit OK again. So now our scene is dark because we are at sunrise, or I guess sunrise. So previewing the solar animation, page 12. From the view control bar, you got to hit the little sun icon here. And there's a couple things we can do here. You can hit sun path on, and what this will do is it'll show you the path of the sun through the sky. Now, I kind of think this is a bit of a gimmick, but whatever. It will show you the solar angle. So if you happen to change the time of year that you're doing the solar study on, you're going to see that sun path get steeper. So of course in the winter our solar angle is shallower, and in the summer it goes up to about 62 degrees above the horizon. So back into the sun path here. You can leave it on if you want, or you can turn it off. But in the same menu, you'll see Preview Solar Study. Now I'm going to change my view here a bit, so it's like that. Preview Solar Study. So now, up on the options bar, you're going to see a play button, which you can hit now. And now Revit's going to step the sun across the site. So, okay, hit the sun icon here at the bottom and choose Preview. Preview. And then once you've done that, up on the top, there's a little play button which will allow you to play your solar animation. So now you can see the sun going on its basis through the sky, or at least the shadows anyway. So from sunrise to sunset. Yes, in exporting the solar animation on page 12, there is a process there on how you export those animations. Okay, so that's the solar study. Let's go to creating a walkthrough, page 13. Now I'm going to get rid of the shadows for now. Okay, so page 13. So the process of creating a walkthrough is as listed at the bullet points. So you create the path of the camera first, then you adjust the targeting of the camera, adjust the path, and then deal with keyframes. So I don't have much time left here, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this because it's not too difficult to understand. It takes maybe a little bit more time to set up. So from the 3D view drop down, so creating your walkthrough should be done in your 3D view. And then on the view tab, when you go to the 3D view drop down, choose the walkthrough tool. So with the walkthrough command started, now what you're going to do, first things first, draw the path that the camera will follow. So in the 3D view, I'll click the top of the view cube, so I'm looking straight down on my site, and I'm just basically going to draw the path that I want my camera to do. And I'm going to do one loop around the building, then I'm going to go in the building, and then I'm going to come out into the courtyard, turn around, and stop. So here you can watch. I'm not going to do it in too many clicks. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and now I'm going to start angling my way into the building. 7 clicks, 8 clicks, 9 clicks. I'm hoping I'm at the right place to come into the front door. 9 clicks, 10, going around where the skylight's here. Going to try and avoid going through the stairs. 10, I think that's 11, 12. There's my way to get out of the courtyard. 13, 14, coming out here. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. There, 20 clicks, done. Finish. So there's my walkthrough path. So oddly, after you finish putting in the path, Revit kind of kicks you out of the walkthrough, and then you have to edit again to go back in and continue. So there's our path, those red dots. Slight problem here, my walkthrough starts underground. So what I need to do is adjust the path. Now, when you're editing the walkthrough, up on the options bar, you can see that there's a controls menu. Do you guys see that there, just above the 3D tab? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to switch back to the path mode. This will allow me to adjust all of where I clicked. So each click creates one of those little red control dots. So I'm going to switch back to path mode here in the drop-down menu. And the dots go from red to being blue. And I'm going to orbit my model around here, and there's my dot. I'm just going to drag it upwards into the sky so that I'm not going to be starting in the dirt. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to look around my model. I want to just kind of adjust the elevation of my path so that I'm not completely flat as I go around the site. So in path mode, you can grab those dots and you can fine-tune their location. So once you've got your path sorted, the next thing you need to do is switch to active camera mode. Now I'm going to go back to the top for this. Here's the deal. Each time that you click on your screen to create basically a spline path for your camera, at each one of these red dots, you can adjust the targeting of your camera. It's called a keyframe. So in active camera mode, Revit shows the camera as a blue icon. Drag that blue icon to each one of your dots, starting from the first one. So there's my blue camera. I'm going to drag it over to this starting point and click. Hey, come on, camera. There we go. So now my blue camera is at the start of the path. Now here's the problem. My camera is not looking at the building. It's looking down the path. See that? Here's my camera. I've dragged it to the first keyframe, but my camera isn't looking at the building. I got two problems. My camera's view depth would never even allow it to see the building. See that triangle there? That's the depth of the view. So what I need to do here, I'm going to drag this out a little bit so I can see a little bit farther away. Now, I'm going to eventually make my camera's depth of view infinite. I'm not going to do that yet. The reason I am not doing it yet is that by keeping it smaller, it's going to make it easier to target things. So, step one, make your camera's depth of view a little bit deeper, just so it's a little bit easier to see it on the screen. You'll see why in a second. Now, right next to the blue camera icon is a little pink dot. That controls your targeting. So what I need to do is grab that pink dot and drag it to the middle of my building. So what I'm doing is I'm making sure that at the beginning of the video, my camera is going to look at the building. Then I'm going to drag the camera to the next dot. At each dot, you need to adjust the targeting. Grab the pink dot, drag it towards the building. Then go to the next dot, drag it to the building. So what you want to do is go to each keyframe and adjust where the camera is looking. And generally speaking, you want it to look at the building. Now, I don't know if you folks can see this, but I think my path was actually too close to the building. There's places here that where my path is, I may be a little bit too close. Maybe I should have pulled my camera away. I could also adjust the field of view, the width of my camera. So here I go. Just go on each one of these views here. Again, I'm making sure that the camera is looking where I want it to look at each one of these keyframes. Now once you get into the building, it's okay for the camera to look down the path. It's totally cool. It's not until we get out into the courtyard where maybe once we get out here, we're like, you know what, by this point we want the camera to actually be looking back at the building now. And we want that to happen for the remainder of the, what do you call these things? The keyframes. And so eventually we want our camera to stop, you know, with us looking back at the building. So good, I'm set up. Now, what we need to do is adjust the velocity of the camera so we're not going the same speed all the way through the walkthrough. So up about here where you start your walkthrough, you should probably be doing 50, 60 kilometers an hour, so say 10 meters per second. But if you're still doing 10 meters per second when you come in here through the front door, I mean, you're going to blow all the hairs off your clients' heads when you do the walkthrough. So what we need to do is take our foot off the gas once we get here approaching the front of the building. So what we need to do is go deal with the walkthrough frames, and you'll find that in the properties palette at the very, very bottom down here, walkthrough frames. You're adjusting how many frames are going to be in your walkthrough. Okay, any movie buffs here? What's the frames per second of your average movie at a theater? Anybody know? 30. Yeah, 24, 30, somewhere in there. So if we say that we're going to do 30 frames per second, how long should our walkthrough be? A minute, maybe? Minute and a half, tops? So if we have 300 frames at 30 frames per second, that's only a 10-second video. Not enough. So maybe 100 seconds, a minute, minute and a half, that's probably not bad. Won't we say 3,000 here? 100-second long video at 30 frames per second. That's maybe getting a little bit on the long side for a project of this size, but whatever. Now, here's the deal. Right now, we're traveling at about 7 meters per second. That's pretty good for flying around the site. Not so good if you're going in the front door. So what we need to do is uncheck uniform speed. Now, what we need to do is figure out which keyframe it is where we're getting close to the front door. So keyframe number 1 is where we started. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So by about keyframe number 8, we should be taking our foot off the gas. So you can do that with the accelerator. So at keyframe number 7, which is here, I'm going to start slowing down. 0.9. Keyframe number 8, coming down. And so what I'm going to do here, as I go through the building, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So 8 through 15, I'm going to really pull it down here. So I'm going to go 0.4. So here I'm going at about 2.8 meters per second. That's still pretty fast. Keep on going down here until I get to, what was it, 15 I think it was. And I may decide that I want to slow this down even more. So now as I'm heading out to the courtyard, I'll speed things up a little bit. But then, as I come back to the end of the rendering, what I want to do is slow the camera right down. So our final few shots of the rendering, it kind of feels like the camera is slowing down and coming to rest. So in fact, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to really slow the camera down right at the end. So initially, camera's going a little bit faster. Maybe I can even bump up the speed a little bit initially as we're coming in. So there we go. Now, let's go look at this thing. So once we're done, we hit yes. In our 3D views here, no, not 3D views, we should see walkthroughs. There it is. Here's our walkthrough. So now we can hit edit walkthrough and we can go back to frame 0. Not frame 0, frame 1. Okay. So, edit, and now play. Oh, what's the problem? You can see here my depth of view wasn't set properly. So let me just stop here. So in my walkthrough settings here, see my far clip offset? I'm just going to uncheck the far clip now. So now we'll be able to see our walkthrough right from the beginning. So we're into overtime now. So this is going, I don't want to keep you folks from your buses, which probably aren't here anyway because of the strike. But this will give you a chance now to look at your walkthrough and decide if you're happy with how things are targeting. I'm not. I need to adjust my targeting so that at one of my keyframes I'm looking more towards the center of the building. With regards to the path, it's not bad. I might want to adjust the targeting of my cameras down at a few of my keyframes. So here if I hit escape, I can bail on the view. I'll just go back into 3D here. So if I want to see my walkthrough again in my 3D view, just right click on the walkthrough and choose show camera, and there it'll show the path and I can hit edit. So what I want to do is go back to editing the path again. So I need to drag my, not the path, the camera. I need to drag my little blue Instamatic to one of these other locations here. And so what I need to do to make the camera look downwards, this is a fine thing. We're very subtle. Now, I don't like it when the camera path or the camera's scope is just shown as a series of lines that terminate. So this is why I like to turn on the far clip. So it turns the camera into this this little box. See that? It makes it really nice to see which way the camera is looking as you're orbiting around the model. Now I want the camera to start looking down a little bit. So what I do, right, initially I use the top of the view cube so I can adjust which way the camera is looking towards the building. So that's the first step, using the top of the view cube. But now to adjust the vertical angle of the camera, I need to roll down and look at things a little bit more horizontally. Come in, so you can see my which way my camera is looking up and down, grab that little pink dot, and you can see that there's a little X right there. If I drag the pink dot downwards, you get a little stick. You guys see that there? That little stick that's appearing right here. Now, if I drag my camera upwards, look at where that little X is. If there's a stick coming down from the pink dot, that means the camera is elevated. If the stick is going up from the dot, that means the camera is looking downwards a little bit. So you can use that as a guide to help you understand whether the camera is looking downwards or level or upwards. So that's how you can set the targeting of your camera vertically. So I wanted to get my camera so it's looking down a little bit. So now when I back out, I can have a look and see where it's looking. Oh, it's not even looking at the building now. So back up to the top of the view cube, grab my dot and drag it. Folks, when you are looking down using your view cube top and you drag your pink dot, you won't change the elevation of the camera. So if you're finding that, you know, getting the camera to pivot upwards or downwards is a bit of a pain, just get it so it's looking up or down the way you want. Then go to the top of the view cube and adjust the plan targeting of your camera, and it'll be great. It's not going to change your vertical elevation of the camera. So once this is done, you can go into your walkthrough view. You may want to turn on, well, here again I got to turn off the far clip. You might even want to do your walkthrough in realistic mode. Now this will take a long time, like probably overnight to export it. So exporting the walkthrough on page 14. As with the solar studies, you go to the file menu, export images and animations and walkthrough, and then you can export this to a video file format of your choice. Just remember that realistic mode will give you a more nice presentation of the building. All your trees will show their foliage, but it's going to take a ton of time for that walkthrough to get generated. You can see my computer is still thinking about it here. Okay, so that's that. So we'll see you folks next week for the final exam, which of course is open book. And I'll give you guys a revised handout just advising you to zip your term project and site file together, and I'll give that to you folks at next week's